Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar series on planning a successful beacon pilot. Thanks a lot for joining us today. I know that some of you are working on some pretty exciting pilots and are looking to take those live very soon, or at least take them to a field test. So I'm quite excited about all the things we're going to talk about today. So let's get started without further ado. I'm joined today by my colleague, Neha. Neha, welcome once again.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. I'm glad to be part of this webinar. It's really exciting and it's a great time to be talking about beacon pilots, because there's so much of data information about so many brands trying to get started with the beacon pilot. And though there's a lot of hype around beacons, there's very little actionable information. So we thought, this is just the right time to be talking about this. I'm really excited.
Great. Yeah, I think we have a boatload of slide material for our guest
Yeah.
today. So hopefully they won't find it too overwhelming. But I think that we do have some information which might be useful, at least we hope, to them.
Yeah.
Before we jump into the slides for today's deck, I just wanted to go over the basics, which we always do um, when we start off our webinars. And that's really what are beacons. Beacons are low cost, low power transmitters. They're equipped with Bluetooth Low Energy, also known as BLE, also called Bluetooth 4.0 or Bluetooth Smart. They're all the same thing, really. And these transmitters essentially are transmitting a signal, a BLE signal, which mobile devices can detect. Once they detect the signal, they can use that to determine proximity and what is known as microlocation. Now, I know everyone dialing into this webinar probably already knows this, but it doesn't hurt to cover the basics. So, yeah, that's how beacons work. So the signal is essentially detected by a smartphone, and the smartphone uses information in the signal, including the signal strength, also known as RSSI, to determine how far it is from a given beacon, right? So it can determine whether it's, let's say, 20 meters away from a beacon or within 2 meters or even zero point 0.5 meters away from a beacon broadcasting a signal. One thing that's kind of important to note is that beacons don't transmit content. That is, they're not transmitting a file or an image or any such thing. They're essentially just transmitting a series of numbers which help identify the beacon. And so the smartphone really is the one that's using that identification information to do something in response to that. So that's how beacons work. I think now that we've covered that, let's move on to what we're going to cover in today's webinar. We're going to go over how to create a pilot roadmap, right? I mean, before you get started, what are all the things that you should be putting together? What should you have right before you even get going on executing on your pilot? We'll go over the metrics that you ought to be measuring during your pilot, and of course, the metrics that you will use to determine the success or failure of your pilot. We'll go over a few examples of successful beacon pilots that will probably help you in your own plans, and we'll also point you at some good tools for running beacon pilots, not just doing campaigns, but also the hardware itself, getting the beacons installed and deployed, and things like that. So yeah, why don't we get started? And let's start by figuring out how a beacon pilot roadmap ought to be created. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask Neha to just help, set the context for how you essentially set up a roadmap.
Yeah, so what we've done here, Ravi, is that we've broadly broken down all the steps that are involved in creating a beacon pilot. So the first one is define the scope of your pilot. You should be aware of what use cases you want to cater to, what goals you want to achieve. The next one is about purchasing beacons, then about deploying beacons. Also, the most important part about deploying beacons is you should be able to manage them, know about battery life or what kind of content you want to send across.
Right.
So you need to manage the campaigns. Also run a limited field test, because obviously in a pilot you would not just want to bombard people with messages directly.
Right.
You would want to test it, and then finally analyze results to see if the pilot makes sense for you, if beacons make sense for you, for your
Right.
business. And so these are the 6 categories that we'll be talking about in detail as we go further.
Great. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the framework that many of our own customers have been using, or we've been advising our
True.
clients on how to use this
Yeah.
kind of a framework to get their beacon pilots off the ground. Great. So why don't we let get going, and we'll go stage wise, or I guess
Yeah.
according to this map, there are six different
Yeah.
things to consider and stages to run through. So we'll start going into detail on
Yeah.
each one of these stages. I'm also guessing, Neha, that we're going to cover some of the very basics, right? Which include things like what is your app strategy, and
Yeah.
because there's no running away from the fact that you need an app of some kind, right,
Yeah.
for your beacon pilot. So, but
True.
we're going to cover all
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
We're going to
Okay.
cover that.
Great.
Yes.
Excellent. I'm excited. I think I'm going to learn a lot, quite honestly,
Yeah.
from this. Yeah, so I guess we talk about creating a roadmap. So looks like the first thing is the goal, right? You want to
Yeah.
make sure what you want to set up. So yeah, tell us more about this.
So as you see, this is the first part about defining
Okay.
the pilot itself. So the first thing we want to do is define the goal as to what you want to measure, what you want to achieve with your pilot.
Uh-huh.
And obviously, the second thing you mentioned about the mobile app, this is a very common question we keep getting from people. Should I use my own app or should I integrate with a third-party app? So that is the decision you need to make then and there. And also the budget. This is something that most of the people definitely have a challenge trying to understand what kind of budget they should allocate
Right.
to.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that in
It's
detail.
actually a tricky one, right?
Yeah.
Because people usually, I believe, kind of forget to take into account things beyond the hardware. I mean, the hardware
Yeah.
is only the starting
True.
point.
True.
Yeah. Great. So yeah, how do we think about the goal of a beacon pilot?
Yeah, so the most important thing is you should be able to understand what you want to measure, what you want to like. For example, you're a retail store and you want to understand how many people actually reach the checkout. In that case, you deploy beacons near maybe the exit so that you understand how many people actually reach the checkout. Or suppose you want to send loyalty based offers to customers or to customers who are just outside your store. In that case, maybe you would deploy beacons right
Right.
at the entrance or right outside your store. So based on the use case you want to decide on what you want to
Right.
cater to, you discover areas in your store and accordingly place beacons there. So this is about setting the goal for your pilot.
I'm guessing, one important thing that I've also been recommending when you set a goal is to not get too ambitious
Yeah.
with beacons, right? I mean, it's pretty new technology to start with, and there are obviously many possibilities, but maybe when you're running a pilot, you want to stay focused,
Yeah.
right? You want to maybe measure one or two or test one or two specific use cases, right? So yeah, I thought I'll just throw that in. Um, yeah, and I guess an important question, which I'm guessing is everyone's
Yeah.
minds, is what do you do about the app?
Yeah.
So yeah, what are the choices here?
So obviously, you definitely need an app. Everybody
Right.
knows that, and a lot of people are trying to figure out if they should have their own app or should they use a third-party app. What we generally suggest is, you should. I mean, if you have an app, nothing like it. It's the best way to
Right.
reach a very targeted audience and refine your messages accordingly. But in case you don't have an app and you still want to test if beacons work for your business, the best way is to integrate with the third party app. We not suggest to start planning and making your own app and then test a pilot, and maybe if you figure out it doesn't work for you,
Right.
it's all that hard work gone waste.
Yeah.
So if you have an app and it has a sufficient number of downloads, you should definitely go with your own app. Otherwise, just integrate it with the third party app and take it further from there.
Yeah, and I think there are some good examples of third-party apps like Retail Me Not and a few others
Yeah.
in the US.
Retail Advisor, Retail Me Not,
Right.
Shopcake, there are a lot
Right.
of.
A lot of good
Yeah.
third-party apps that you can use to test whether this makes sense or not for you, right? And I guess one way to also think about this is, um, at a minimum, if it's working with a third-party app, chances are if you can create the same distribution with your own app, then that just strengthens the
Yeah.
proposition. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think everyone is clear at this point, and even if you're doing an Eddystone beacon thing, you're going to essentially have to worry about apps, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Excuse me. Right. So yeah, the budget. I guess the budget is a pretty critical factor. So why don't you help us, walk through this, Neha?
Yeah, so obviously, as many of you would know, the first thing to consider is the number of beacons deployed.
Right.
Inevitably, the budget, a major chunk of it would involve the hardware.
Hmm.
So, the first thing is to understand, the complexity of your use case. Say, for example, you want to give a feature of in-store navigation in your app. That
Right.
definitely would require you to install a lot more number of beacons than you would need for a welcome message, where a welcome message would just maybe one or two beacons at the entrance, and that's
Right.
it.
Yeah.
So, but ideally for we generally suggest to our customers, if it's a beacon pilot, you should stick to some simple use cases so that you can test, if they work for you. And suppose you are a retailer, then we've set out the ideal, set of use cases for you.
Right.
Would be a welcome message, a feedback, basically about, how was your in-store experience, and maybe promotions.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess a typical size. I mean, I guess you have recommendations
Yeah.
on the number of beacons you should be thinking about.
Yeah, so based on our own experience with
Yeah.
clients who've been setting up pilots, uh, we have reached this conclusion that if you have a store of around 500 square feet, you would need minimum 3 beacons. So if it's
Right.
a bigger store, around 2,500 square feet, maybe something between 12 to 15. Considering you are using some basic use cases, not
Right.
something complicated like
Right.
in-store navigation, uh, this should be
And I guess the
enough.
reason for the larger number is also because we're assuming that if it's a retail use case, you have different sections in a retail store.
Yeah,
You want to track all those sections separately. And if you have subsections,
yeah,
so you might end up having many more than. It's not just about how much area a given beacon covers, right?
yeah,
It's also about specificity, right?
yeah,
You want one beacon only for the women's shoes section, maybe, right? Or
yeah.
another beacon only for the women's jacket section, even though they might be very close
Very
to each
close,
other,
yeah.
right?
True.
Great. Cool. Yeah. And I guess another aspect of the budget, is clearly developer time. Um, this is something which I can talk about a little bit because we have experience with this. Developer time is one of the most underestimated aspects of doing a beacon deployment, mainly because when it involves your app, typically there is a certain amount of effort involved in prototyping, or even for that matter, building the very basic sort of use cases inside your own app, which typically involves maybe more coding up a couple of new screens, integrating with the SDK itself. For example, if you were to, you know, buy a beacon stack kit and then integrate the iOS and Android SDK, you would need to take that SDK and put it into your existing app. And that's developer time that you have to allocate because you have to integrate the SDK, you have to test it, all of those things, and of course you have to roll it out to customers either through a beta channel or even through the regular app stores. So when you're doing it with your own app, it's important to factor in the developer time of your own team, which maybe which may have a number of other priorities on its head. And you need to make sure that they are available, and it takes a certain amount of time. Um, on the third party app, I guess really in the case of a third party app, typically you don't have much of a choice in terms of what customization you can
Yeah.
really, achieve. You can only integrate with the app, and the app probably offers a couple of standard things like, on welcome, do this, and on if a person has been dwelling long enough in a certain area, do this, or send this kind of message. Those kinds of things are the only things you can do with a third party
Yeah.
app. So in that sense, third party app would be a lot more bounded and probably cheaper as well in terms of not involving your own developers time.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And obviously, you lose out on the refinement of, and the kind of
Right.
targeting you would want
Sure.
ideally. But yeah, it takes you around a week maybe, just for the integration with the software. That's
Right.
that's it.
Also, I guess with a third-party app, one of the things that you may not be able to do is, let's say, integrate your own custom backend of your own. Like if your CRM needs to be integrated into if you want to personalize messages, excuse me, if you want to personalize messages, then you would not be able to achieve that in a third-party app because the CRM would not be integrated. So, yeah, those are relevant points. Yeah. Moving on, I guess, yeah, this is about how you purchase a beacon kit or how you decide what hardware to acquire, right?
Yeah, so depending on the space you have and what kind of power options you would have in that defined space, you could choose between battery powered or USB powered or electromagnetic wave powered beacons. I know battery powered beacons are much more popular, and a lot of people are not even aware of the other two. But each of them is equally good, and depending on the use case, depending on where you're going to use them, I
Right.
think each of them makes sense in their own
Right.
area. So make a choice there. And coming to price, I'm sure all of us know that the price can vary anything between $10 to $70. The third thing that we generally keep talking about is, interior design or aesthetics, and a lot of people don't understand what we mean by that. So what it really means is, suppose you're a museum and you have, obviously a very well-defined architecture and the look and feel, and you would not want a ugly looking beacon to stand
Right.
out and people to notice it.
Yeah.
So you should choose something that goes well with the aesthetics, and obviously when you're placing beacons, you would not place it on top of a painting. You would put
Right.
it somewhere where it's not so visible.
Right.
But it should generally maybe camouflage with the background, and it should go along with whatever the tone of the room is, the color
Right.
is there.
Yeah.
And another very important thing is that the compliance with both Eddystone and iBeacon. But Eddystone has been announced, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of development in that area. So,
Yeah.
do you want to
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that there are uses for different kinds of beacons. Although I have to say, Neha, that in our own experience, we have found that people gravitate towards the battery-powered ones
Yeah.
in general, mainly because of the flexibility they offer you, right?
Hmm.
Because if they're battery-powered and they last a reasonable length of time, you don't have to worry about power requirements at the exact spot that you want to
Yeah.
mount a beacon or
Hmm.
what have you. So we found that people gravitate to the battery powered ones. In terms of per beacon price, yeah, it can vary, but generally you'll find that people offer kits. Like
Hmm.
even Beacon Stack offers a Beacon Stack starter kit, which has 3 beacons in it. So I guess the minimum size is typically 3 beacons in a set. But yes, specifically about standards, right? Now we don't have just iBeacon, we also have Eddystone. That is an upcoming standard which is evolving rapidly. So you definitely want to pick hardware that's compliant with both. And of course, you want hardware that's capable of working with both iOS devices as well as Android. So these are kind of the minimum requirements. And I guess I should just add that the Beacon Stack starter kit is fully compliant with all of these: Eddystone, iBeacon, Android, iOS, and that stuff. Yeah.
I think we should
So
also emphasize on the fact that be sure that the platform that you use is compatible with Android devices, because
sure.
not all of them are compatible, and there's not
Right.
enough information actually as to which devices are. So be sure about the platform you choose and the devices you choose for your pilot.
Yeah, that's sound advice. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So moving on, so I guess from the point you decide to purchase, you have to figure out how to get these
Yeah.
beacons actually installed, right? So yeah,
So starting with again aesthetics, like I just mentioned that it should
yeah,
go along with whatever is there, and it should not be depending on what sector you are in. If you're a museum, it
right,
makes a lot more sense to not leave them
sure,
noticeable. Or maybe if you're a retail store, a lot of people walking into your store, maybe you'd keep it at a higher height,
right,
maybe.
yeah,
So there are things like that you need to factor in.
okay,
Okay, and where will beacons be placed? Obviously, it depends on what you want to achieve with the pilot. Do you want to find out how many people are reaching checkout? Do you want to see how many people buy from the women's section?
right,
So depending on that, you could choose the areas where you want to.
sure,
But ideally, we suggest that you spread them out evenly so that you have good analytics and you can actually measure things like the customer path and
sure.
stuff like that.
Yeah, so yeah, that makes sense. That's definitely something that we've seen as well. So I guess installation is probably the easier thing, right? You just
Yeah.
take the beacons and make sure that they're actually physically installed in the location. But I guess the more important and pertinent question really is how do you now use these beacons in conjunction with an app? So I guess that's where your beacon platform or beacon content management system comes in. Yeah, tell us a little more about how that would work.
So yeah, this is a very common question we get from customers that do we really need a platform? And we already always say yes,
Right.
because it's very important for you to be aware of the health of all the beacons that you've installed. There'll be times then the battery just dies and you're not aware,
Sure.
and it's very complicated to use a scanner app. There's this option of using a scanner app and just going and checking for each beacon, but
Right.
that would be extremely tedious. And also with the kind of messaging and the kind of interaction and engagement you want to achieve, it's always best to have a platform which has a good content management system in place, where you could refine, use the right messages at the right
Sure.
time. So you could, in your dashboard, you could choose what kind of audience you want to send to. Maybe women aged between 30 to 40 get offers on bags. You could
Right.
reach to that level of precision in
Yeah.
targeting. So we always advise that you use a BMS, basically a beacon management
Yeah.
system.
Yeah, I think this is a really pertinent point because if you don't have a platform which allows you to make campaigns on the fly, make
Mhm.
changes, change messaging, all with just a couple of clicks and all of those kinds of things, um, you'll essentially have to go back to your developer every single time you
Yeah.
want to make a change, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to
Mhm.
go back to your developer to change the text messages, or you don't want to go build a whole new backend just so that you can change the kind of notification that's delivered
Yeah.
to a person's device when they enter a given zone. So yeah, a beacon content management system and fleet management
Yeah.
system is kind of essential really to getting your pilot off the ground. So I guess some good examples of what kinds of features you'd look
Mhm.
for in a content management system,
Yeah.
right? So maybe you can just, what are some of these things that we should look for? I mean, I can see that, we've given some examples. So
Mhm.
yeah, tell us a little bit about this.
Like I mentioned, you would not want to just stick around with sending text messages, which you would anyways do.
Sure.
You sending messages on people's phone numbers when you're using something like beacons, which give you the flexibility and enable you to send very targeted messages
Right.
and the kind of messages you want to. You'd want to use a platform that gives you the flexibility to use, various kinds of cards. Say, suppose the Beacon Stack platform, for example, has cards where you can choose between a summary card, which is a normal text message, a photo card where you see a photo and a message, and a
Right.
media card where you can share an audio file or a video file,
Right.
or maybe even a web page. We
Right.
launched this web page much before the Eddystone Beacon, I would
That's
like to
right.
mention, where we could just give a link to send a link and people could click and
Right.
see what's there. So yeah, it's very important to use engage customers using the right
Right.
methods.
And I guess what makes the feature, the cards feature of Beacon Stack very compelling is that essentially it's just a web UI. You can make all the changes on the fly, and the minute you hit the save button or the apply button, these changes actually synchronize into the app automatically. So the next time the app goes in front of a Beacon, it has the new rules and the new
Yeah.
messages configured. So yeah, I mean, this definitely sounds like a good engagement
Yeah.
tool, right, for marketers. What is another example? I guess we have something called places. Could you help
Yeah,
us
yeah.
understand how that works?
Yes, this is one of the most commonly asked questions. What
Right,
if I have an app? What if I'm using beacons, but people have not turned on Bluetooth?
right,
And this is a very relevant question and a very fair one that people can ask. So there's a very easy way to do this. You could use a geofenced radius within which if anybody enters, you
hmm
could just nudge them to switch on Bluetooth.
right,
So the Beacon Stack platform has this feature called Places,
hmm
where you can define a geofenced radius. Anybody who comes in, enters or exits that radius, you'll get a call back, and
right,
then you have this option of sending them a notification saying you could just turn on Bluetooth, so
right.
that from then onwards they could see your messages and then interact with them. So it's a
Absolutely.
very easy and smooth way of getting them to switch on Bluetooth.
Also, I guess it's actually fairly flexible. What you want to say in the message
Yeah.
is completely up to you,
Yeah.
right?
True.
You don't have to say it's on Bluetooth. You could say something else, or
Mhm.
you could incentivize them in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
True.
it's definitely one of those features that came as a result of having to face real life, challenges in getting people to do the Bluetooth, having that on to get the beacons to work. Yeah. Um, Cool. So I guess these are all features already
Yeah.
available in Beacon Stack, so available out of the box for someone who'd like to,
True.
get started right away. Yeah. So let's move on to how you actually run the pilot, right? What are your recommendations?
So, like I said, when we started that, you should choose a limited audience. We should not just
hmm
think of, building a campaign and just sending out, trying it out directly with your, the audience you want to cater to. It's
Right.
best to test it in a limited audience with a limited set of people,
hmm
and you could collect all that feedback and make sure your app you include all that information and work on it, make your app better, make your messages better. You could get information as to what kind of messages work better, what kind of messaging intervals work better. Should you send messages more frequently or after say number of seconds? What is the dwell time after which you would send messages? And then taking all this feedback into consideration, you could then refine the whole experience and then
Excuse me. Yeah.
build it on scale. So this is very important because if you just test it out or
Right.
just roll it out for your targeted audience, maybe the experience will not be so good.
Actually, what I'd like to add here, Neha, is that I was recently reading about Target's Beacon pilot, which they are
Hmm.
currently running in about 50 stores in the United States. And what I read is that the Target app promises,
Hmm.
when you turn on or you opt in to the Beacon, messaging, the Target store actually, the Target app actually tells you that it will not send you more than two messages in a visit. So what that
Yeah.
means is, you're really not going to get 10 in one
Yeah.
shot just because you went to 10 different sections in the store. And I think that's pretty
Mm.
smart because you're setting expectations up front. You're telling consumers, hey, look, I'm going to track your behavior inside the store and I'm going to send you maybe two messages
Hmm.
just to be helpful, but
Yeah.
really not to kind of creep you out, right? So, and I
Yeah.
think that's sensible. It just makes sense.
Yeah, to give an example, Lord and Taylor did the same thing, with the pilot. When they
Uh-huh.
started the pilot, they were sending around 8 messages. But
Really?
by the end of the pilot, they realized that, it didn't make sense to send so many, and now they've come down to three.
Yeah.
So that's one learning they got while running the trial itself. So, yeah, it's really important to keep all that into account.
Great. Excellent. Yep. And how do we know if a pilot that we've run is actually succeeded, or what are the things that we should really be looking at in terms of analyzing the results?
Yeah, so one thing would be, to get feedback from your volunteers. Did they see any value addition to their experience, or was it just any random offer that they
Sure.
would anyways get?
Uh-huh.
And to understand what kind of messages resonated with them, what they really liked about it, did they find it engaging? Was it something like an offer, or was it something like a product information message which worked better? And then it also helps you find out what are the hotspots in your venue. Maybe say if you're a retail store, you'll know which section of the store gets the maximum footfall,
Right.
and maybe you could place items accordingly, or you could allocate staff.
Sure.
A lot of things could be done. And obviously you should be sure that the use cases you're trying are scalable. Right now you're testing it with a limited set of people in a limited area or location,
That's right.
but is it actually possible to scale it? That's
Right.
one
To
thing.
40, 50,
Yeah.
100 stores,
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah.
As a
Yeah.
business, it's very important for you to understand that.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, it looks like it's something that people may be wondering is if is all of this information available somewhere in another form as well. So we thought we'll let you guys know that we actually have an ebook which you can download right now from our website. It's the definitive guide to beacon pilots. There's a lot of information with a whole lot of detail on how pilots across the world with beacons have exactly been planned and how they've been executed. And I think we've covered a lot of different verticals.
Yeah,
Neha, could you tell
that's
us a
true.
little more about
Yeah,
this?
so it covers events, museums, retail stores,
Okay.
hotels and restaurants,
Oh,
and
great.
outdoor venues. So it covers whole lot of verticals. So it's really beneficial for people to just have a look and understand. And also we've talked about very specific campaigns for each of these
Great.
verticals. How to set up a beacon campaign for that vertical.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think you guys will find this really useful. So we've actually posted the link to this ebook on the questions window. You should see it right now appearing. Yes, it's appeared, and so you can just click through and download the ebook. It's completely free, and you can learn more about how to get your beacon pilots. Rather, you can learn about how others have done their beacon pilots and how you can do the exact same thing in your own beacon pilot. So moving on, metrics, right? This is something that people talk about a lot. What metrics should you be measuring? How do you know whether your pilot's really achieving, any of the original goals that you had set out for it? So, what kind of metrics should we be measuring, Neha?
So, you can get very specific information on, the number of visits you get on a given day, the number of unique visitors you get, or the outside potential as to, how many people who are actually outside your store that you could, get inside your store
Sure.
using beacons. Customer path metrics, like, the common paths that people take around your store. What is the
Hmm.
general dwell time? How much time do people spend in a particular zone?
Hmm.
And then there's something called zone interdependency, like say suppose the women's purse section and the women's belt section are
Right.
interdependent. People generally go from here to there, and
Right.
there's more correlation between their movement in
Got
these
it.
sections.
Right.
In terms of loyalty, if you're a loyalty app or you have a loyalty program, nothing like it, because you can keep a track of your repeat visitors, how frequently they visit, and maybe you could incentivize them on based on those metrics.
Yeah.
Okay, and I would like to mention that the Beacon Stack dashboard has all of this. You could measure things like rules performance chart, where you could find, which are the campaigns that are performing best in
Right.
your store, and you could get visitor analytics data as to what's the footfall like. You could get a heat map. Basically, the image that we shared on the last slide was
Right.
right from our own
Yeah.
dashboard. So
Great. Yeah, there's a lot of information that gets captured automatically, through our platform. So essentially, you can view all these reports and charts once you're running a pilot, and it's all available in the Beacon Stack console.
yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a good example of the things that metrics that are already being captured on pretty much every pilot. So that makes sense. Great. So this is probably something which is something a lot of people are looking forward to hearing about. Successful beacon pilots, and I'd love to learn more about what these companies or locations have done.
Yeah, so this is one very interesting beacon pilot. It was done by the John F. Kennedy Airport at
Hmm.
Terminal 4 of the airport. So what they really did was, they used a tracking system to monitor the Bluetooth signals and Wi-Fi signals from travelers' phones,
Uh-huh.
and they broadcasted the waiting times at various points, like the security checkpoint, the custom areas, and the taxi queue. So people exactly would know how much time they would take to reach there,
Right.
and this kind of data also helped the airport to better manage the allocation of staff. They would know which areas get congested more, and accordingly allocate staff in those areas. So this was one very interesting use case.
Great. So it used both
And
Bluetooth, BLE,
Wi-Fi.
and Wi-Fi
Yeah.
together. Great. Um, and this one is talking about L magazine. How did this work?
Yeah, so this is basically Elle Magazine collaborated with two apps, the Retail Me Not app and the Shop Advisor app. So the Retail Me Not app is more of an offer sending app.
Hmm.
So the way it worked with this one is anybody who had this app installed, and there was an Elle magazine available in a nearby store, they would get an offer as to buy
Great.
this magazine. And the other app, the Shop Advisor app, which is a shopping assistant app, the way that worked, this is very interesting. Say it was the month of September, whichever brands advertised in that particular issue of the magazine,
Uh-huh.
they could promote their products using this app.
Oh,
So
great.
suppose you are in a store, you're standing somewhere, and there's a Levi's
Excuse me.
store
Right.
nearby,
Hmm.
and the Levi's store ad was there in the Elle magazine. So you'd get a product notification
Oh,
saying that there's an offer on Levi's in the adjoining store, and you could visit that.
that's cool.
So
That's
yeah,
seriously cool.
so it was a great platform for all these products to use Elle and then reach out to the customers who had the Shop Advisor app on their phone.
Great. Excellent. Yeah, this is a good example, I think, of using a third-party app, right?
Yeah,
Because clearly L Magazine here
yeah.
didn't really want to bother with its own app and its own L app to worry about those downloads. So Shop Advisor was a perfect third-party app to actually integrate with
Yeah.
to see the effectiveness of their weekend campaigns.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, sounds like something which is kind of low-hanging fruit, right, to try
Yeah,
out.
that's true.
Um, Great. So having covered those examples, we'll talk a little bit about tools you can use for running your pilot. Something that you'll probably run into is making sure that you can install beacon at a certain height, because most of the time you want the beacon signal to kind of uh, be visible, or not visible, but the beacon signal to reach different parts of a given store. So you want to put it at a height, maybe on a ceiling or something. And usually there's, it helps to have some kind of tool which will let you put that, maybe you need a ladder or something. You definitely want to use some kind of adhesive to make sure the beacon stays on the wall. We recommend the 3M adhesive, these stickers that you get, double-sided tape, work really well. And on the software front, you definitely want to use a platform that's able to monitor the status and health of each beacon that you have deployed. Typically, a platform like Beacon Stack would essentially show you battery life of each beacon, show you when the beacon was last seen, even convey information like sensor information, like the temperature, and for that matter, if the beacon's moving and things like that. So that's just from a management standpoint or fleet management standpoint, and certainly you want to have some level of analytics so that you can actually understand how your campaigns are doing as part of the pilot that you ran, as well as analyzing visitor behavior. So just some of the things to keep in mind. Which brings us to the Beacon Stack kit, which I'm sure many of you know have heard of already. But we'll take a minute to just make sure that you understand what the Beacon Stack Starter Kit has. To begin with, it's a complete kit which includes enterprise-grade beacons, 3 of them. It includes a feature-rich Beacon Stack app, which has the capability of not just managing your beacons, but also demoing your beacons in a pilot setting or even in a client setting. You may be an agency that would like to demonstrate to your clients how beacons work and what their power is. You can just use the Beacon Stack app. It's essentially connected to the Beacon Stack platform, and it takes minutes to set up a demo, which you can use with your clients or your internal key stakeholders who may be deciding on the future of a beacon project. We actually at Beacon Stack believe that the best way to really get people to understand the power of beacons, to show them a demo. It's really, there's only that much you can do with showing people PowerPoint and explaining how beacons work. When you show people a demo, they really just get the feel of it. And what we've done with the Beacon Stack app is made sure that the demo is really built right into the platform. It's ready to go. And we actually think that most people who buy the kit will be able to get a demo working in about 30 minutes from the time you get the kit. Of course, the kit also includes access to our cloud platform, which has the ability to do proximity campaigns and also gather analytics. So all of this is included in the Beacon Stack Starter Kit, which is priced at $79 on our website and available on our website. We actually have a number of different variations of our kit. You can buy the starter kit, which is available for $79, and we think it's ideal for internal demos. That comes with 3 beacons. But if you're really already at the stage where you need a couple more beacons because you're doing an internal pilot and you need maybe 9 beacons or 10 beacons, we offer a pilot kit, which you can buy for $199, and it really offers a lot of savings. It's 20% off the price of 3 starter kits. And so that's available on our website as well. And if you're actually much further along than a pilot, you're ready to go to a large-scale deployment where you need 30, 40, 50, maybe even 100 beacons, we essentially offer a deployment kit, which is priced at $649, and it's ideal for mid-sized deployments. Gives you 30 beacons all at once, delivered worldwide, in usually under a week. We basically offer these different kinds of kits depending on where you are with your beacon project or your beacon pilot. Now, for all of you attending our webinar today, we have an early bird offer, which we'd love to extend to you. You can use the coupon code printed on this slide to get 15% off on a starter kit order. I just want you to know that this is only available to the first 20 orders. So make sure that you run across and you get to store.beaconstack.com and place an order and get a kit for 15% off. This is not a discount that we usually offer. So if I were you and I were looking to try this out, I would definitely go and buy a kit right now. So that's about Beacon Stack kits, and that really brings us to the end of our presentation. At this point, we will take the questions that you may have typed already into the questions window. If you haven't, please feel free to do that. We do have another 10 minutes before we wind up today. There's a question here about third-party applications that you can use. We've already covered how you can use applications like Shopkick, RetailMeNot. There's also Shop Advisor, the example we showed you in the presentation. And also in China, WeChat is a pretty good example because WeChat has integration with beacons, which you can use if you're trying to. In fact, recently Pizza Hut in China used WeChat as the third-party app with which they integrated. A question here about buying electromagnetic beacons. It's a good question. We actually on our website have a complete beacon hardware guide. So if you go to beaconstack.com and click on hardware guide in the footer, you'll see a complete listing of all the different kinds of beacons, and we've also included the electromagnetic ones that you're looking for. So definitely go take a look. A question about recommendations for a good CMS platform. This is kind of funny, actually. I mean, obviously the answer is Beacon Stack. So yes, buy a kit, and you'll get to use the platform as part of the kit, and definitely try it out. I know I was talking about Beacon Stack, but honestly, we have built some of the key features that you'll find in any Beacon Stack platform, in any beacon platform. So our recommendation is to try Beacon Stack out. There's a question here about whether this presentation deck will be available for download later. Yes, absolutely. You will get an email with a full link to the video as well as the deck. What is the most common mistake that people make when implementing a beacon pilot? That's a great question. The most common mistake is people don't factor in the reason why a customer would have their app in the first place, or why they would download an app. People kind of, when they plan the pilot, they're usually forgetting, and that's why we emphasized the need to make sure that you think through your app strategy. The second mistake that most people make is that they actually plan too much into a pilot. So what we recommend is to go easy, to go slow, and to essentially not make it an isolated experience, but actually integrate beacons with your marketing strategy. That's what we recommend. We think that that's something you should also be doing. Don't run a beacon pilot completely in isolation. Um, so there's a question here about when it comes to retail store mapping for displays, products, etc. Who does that? Um, is it your experience that detailed store mapping is typically something most retail locations have available? Yes, absolutely. A good example is the Alex and Annie store chain in the US. They definitely do have that, and they have a lot of information that's available and mapped. So that's the answer to your question. In the example on the JFK app, did the users have to download an app? Yes, they did have to download an app. And A question here about companies that have loyalty plans that are compatible with Beacon Stack. We don't exactly have a listing at the moment. We have a number of companies that have tested our solution, but we don't have any official integrations that we have announced yet. So, you can feel free to look around, and I'm sure you'll find people who have played with our kit. That's it. I think that brings us to the end of today's webinar. I want to thank you all of you for joining us today. I know some of you have joined it from time zones where it's pretty late in the night. So thank you again for your time. And Neha, thanks a
Yeah,
lot for
thank
joining
you
us today.
everyone, and
Yeah,
it was great talking to everybody today. Uh, Good night.
great. Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.